All right, we're live. So welcome to today's Horse Conscious School, and I'm delighted to welcome with me Dr. Robert Cook. And I'm just doing a bit of setup as we go along here. So bear with me. I've just got to switch over so as I know that we are going to be live. So we are live now. All right. Okay. So. Yes, so let me go back. Right, so welcome to today's call. Now, we've had a huge number of questions sent in, and we're going to try and get through these as many as we can, and if we can't, then we might do a rerun for you. So let's hope that you are going to be, if you've got any questions, we'll answer them for you. And if not, what we'll do, as I say, might do a rerun, have a second go round or something like that. We'll see how it goes. Now, I'm just, if you see me looking down to the right, this is where my questions are here. I'm just checking that this is here. Can't seem to see that it's starting yet here. So bear with me a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Cook, and he is going to answer, sort of talk to you a bit about his background whilst I actually just make sure that we've got the technical things going. So Bob, you're on the line there. So welcome to the call.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Right, so if you'd like to just talk to us a bit about your background whilst I fiddle around in the background and make sure that the foreground is going, as it were.
Well, I am a retired veterinarian of academic retirement, but in fact I've been as busy since retirement as I was during the time I was a full member of faculty. I've worked at a number of veterinary schools in England, London, Cambridge, Glasgow, and again also in the States, Illinois, and for the last 25 years or more. In fact, I'm still a member of faculty at Tufts University School of Veterinary Medicine. About 20 years ago, I was introduced to a new design of cross-under Bitless bridle, which I liked very much, and that triggered a new line of research because I quickly realized the harm that a bit had been doing to a horse for the last 5,000 years. And it prompted me to ask the question, which I should have asked many, many years previously, what does a bit really do to a horse? My research interest has always been in the head end of the horse, but it took me 40 years before I really saw the bit, in the sense that I questioned the right that it had to be there. And it turns out that it doesn't have any right at all. It's never been validated, certainly never been supported by any scientific evidence, and still hasn't. There is no scientific justification for the use of a bit. There's all sorts of scientific justification for removing it. It's a foreign body in a very sensitive body cavity. And it was a Bronze Age mistake 5,000 years ago that led to this tradition and the ensuing mythology that has shrouded and masked the disadvantages of a bit for so many years since.
Right, and we're still having a problem just loading up here, Bob. So what I'm going to do is just ask you to start talking generally about some of your thoughts on the use of bits and bitless. I mean, one of the sort of key questions, I think, is that why did we start down the wrong path, I suppose?
Well, I think I've probably just explained that. Essentially, we grew up, we've all grown up, or most of us have, I suppose. I'm 85 now. I certainly grew up, and most everybody else has grown up not knowing any alternative. I rode for many, many years with a double bridle, completely oblivious of the harm that I might be causing. I wasn't even aware of the harm. I hoped that I wasn't causing too much. I survived, and my horses did, but more by luck than judgment, I think. And now if I was to take up riding again, which I doubt that I shall, I certainly would never feel safe riding with a bit. I would certainly choose to ride bitless right from the word go. The bit
Why would you feel not safe?
Well, the bit is responsible for so many accidents to both rider and horse. It triggers more than 100 unwanted behaviors and about 40 different diseases. That's reason enough for not wanting it. And if you remove the bit, it's rewarding to discover that you have a better horse than you thought you had. Many problems that you had never suspected were caused by the bit in the first instance now disappear. And you suddenly say to yourself, oh, that's yet another problem that was being caused by the bit. There was a time, and I think there still is for many people, certainly was with me, when I assumed in my ignorance that there were only about a dozen signs of aversion to the bit. But now, as I've mentioned, I keep adding to my list, and the conservative number is 100, but in fact I could, without much difficulty, probably list on paper something around 200 different unwanted behaviors. And although I keep using this phrase, unwanted behavior, it's not a very good phrase, because that's obviously anthropomorphic, and it's certainly rider-centric. It's from the rider's point of view. The rider finds these behaviors inconvenient and troubling and a bit annoying, perhaps, when in fact we should recognize the fact the horse is an honest animal, and it shows by its behavior that it is in pain or discomfort, distress or fear. So all these, what we lightly referred to as unwanted behaviors, are signs of pain and discomfort.
Right. So I'm getting a lot of feedback here. So you might have to put your headphones on.
Ah.
Okay. So whilst you're doing that, let me ask you. Oh, that's better. It's better now. Right. So let me ask you, hopefully you can hear me. Obviously, one of the major concerns people have is safety, and they think that they need a bit to be safe. So once you're set up, Bob, perhaps you'd like to answer that. And I'm hoping people can see us. I've just sent an alternative link for the webinar. So
yes, is the sound all right now? I'm not sure that my
yes, it's perfect. If you can hear me, I can hear you loud and clear.
Is that, yeah? Am I using my headphones now?
Well, it sounds fine. So you go ahead.
Okay.
So the question is about safety and people wanting to be safe in a bitless bridle.
The point is that it's not safe to ride with a bit. It is much safer to ride bitless. It would be foolish of me to say that riding bitless eliminates all risk. Horse riding is an inherently risky sport, but the risk can be enormously reduced by removing a metal foreign body from the horse's mouth. So many accidents and injuries are directly caused by the bit. The number of behaviors that can be removed, the number of unwanted behaviors, to come back to that annoying term, the number of unwanted behaviors that can be eliminated by removing the bit is in the region of 88%. In other words, 88% of the unwanted behaviors are caused by the bit. Yes, a few behaviors are caused by pain from the saddle, and from other causes. But the bit is the major source of trouble, pain and discomfort to the horse. So by removing the bit, you can advance the welfare of the horse, just almost out of all recognition. The other thing is, and we'd better face this straight away, we need to forget what is a myth. The myth that a bit controls a horse. It doesn't. The bit is the most common reason why riders lose complete control of their horse. And just as a reminder of that, bear in mind that at any given moment, the horse can choose, or the rider may actually force him to do this. By pulling on the reins, the rider places the bit between the horse's teeth. At that moment, the horse is in charge and will remain so. So, for example, let's assume that your horse spooks. You, like myself and most riders, will lose their balance, clutch at the reins. It's just a reflex action which we would find difficult to avoid. Most of us don't have an independent seat. So we clutch at the reins. The horse was frightened in the first instance just from a small piece of paper that was fluttering across the trail, maybe, and spooked, spun around and began to run away. But immediately, because we have lost our balance, now we hit the horse hard in the mouth with the bit.
Right.
So that confirms from the horse's point of view that monster is very dangerous, painful, and something to be scared of. So they start running faster and faster. As a rider, we now continue to pull on the reins harder and harder. In so doing, we place the bit between the horse's premolar teeth. The horse bites down on it, and now, as I've said, the horse is in charge, and that's the initiation of a bolt. Now consider what happens if you don't have a bit in the horse's mouth. The horse will still spook. Just because you don't have a bit in the mouth doesn't mean that a horse's instinctive fear of unexpected objects, moving objects in particular, doesn't mean that they will stop getting frightened. So yes, the horse will still spook, will still spin, and will still start to run. And the rider will still clutch at the reins. The difference, great and wonderful difference, is that now all the horse will feel is a passing tug on the whole of the head. No pain. And the tug won't in itself upset the horse. So the horse runs away, not feeling any pain, and after 6 or 7 yards thinks to himself, well, there's nothing to be scared of here. There was no pain. That monster has disappeared, isn't following me. I can calm down and go back to a walk, which it does very happily. So you recover from the spook so much more rapidly. The horse recovers from the spook, and the whole emergency doesn't escalate into what can end up as a tragedy.
Right, but if I was, I'm going to have to ask you to put the headphones on. Hopefully. Yeah. Yes. Otherwise, I'm hearing myself echo, you see. So if I was to play devil's advocate, then I would say, yes, but if I'm riding, the horse spooks, and I then really yank on the reins, then the horse is going to come to a halt because I am, pulling backwards in it, and he is going to think, well, I better not go any further. And that's what you see.
No, if you pull back on the reins, he's going to run even faster. If you pull back on the reins with a bit in the horse's mouth, now you're hitting the horse in the mouth. You're causing extreme pain, and horses are wired to run from pain. They don't know what caused that pain in the mouth. They just run mindlessly. So no, it's wrong to assume that by just pulling on the reins that this is the signal that will require a horse to stop. The bitted rein does not act like a brake in a car.
Right. Okay. So how about this then? There is a methodology to get the horse to go to the side, so you're getting to go around in ever decreasing circles to slow him down. Now, would that work, for example, with the bitless bridle, the Dr. Cook bitless bridle, for example?
It would work with any bitless bridle. Yes, we don't need to talk just specifically about the crosshunter. Yes, if your horse is running faster than you want him to, shall we say he's running away, though he's less likely to run away if you don't have a bit in the mouth. You have to bear that in mind. But if I concede that, yes, there will be occasions when still your horse is running faster than you want him to, turning him in a circle, it makes good sense. Sitting back in the saddle and quietly breathing and talking to the horse gently also is a help.
Right. And is there any difference between the different types of bitless bridle in terms of, not in terms of the way they function? Are you able to comment on other forms of bitless bridle that maybe have metal at the sides, the sort of the wheels and so forth, or is that not something?
Yes. These days there are so many different designs of bitless bridles. They're not quite as numerous as there are different designs of bits, but nevertheless, there's now enough bitless bridles to be a little confusing from the point of view of selection. They can be divided, like the bits can, into the bitless equivalent of a snaffle and the bitless equivalent of a curb. In other words, leverage and non-leverage bitless bridles. Most of the bitless bridles are non-leverage, but there are a few. The mechanical hackamore with the long shank, for example, allows a rider to provide more pressure, unnecessary pressure, in my opinion. The LG bridle provides the option for providing more pressure, but I personally don't see the requirement for more pressure. The horse will respond to a touch, and that's what we should be aiming for, and nothing but a touch. A horse can feel a fly landing on its face. We don't need to apply pressure to the point of pain before a horse will respond.
Okay, so that raises another point, and as I say, I'm going to be glancing down to the side here because this is where my questions are, and I should be naming names here. So we had a question earlier, for example, about is there any justification for retaining the bit? That was from Mike Harrison in Norfolk, UK. So thank you, Mike. This one is, we kind of answered.
On the internet here, I haven't spoken to you or corresponded with you for a while now. To answer your question, there is no justification for using a bit. There's certainly no physiological, ethical, or humane justification. The only reason, and it's not very good reason, that a rider might use a bit is that they, for reasons of their own, wish to compete. And now if you compete in certain disciplines, the use of a bit is mandatory at the moment. But that's the only reason. It's an administrative reason. It's a man-made reason. It has nothing to do with the wishes of the horse. It's certainly not a horse-centric reason. If the horses were allowed to voice their preference, they would vote for bitless bridles.
Okay, the point actually that the question I was looking for, and I found it now. So the question was, you said that a horse is sensitive enough to recognize a fly landing on it, and we had a question here from Rebecca in North Carolina, who says that the nose and poll are extremely sensitive areas. Are you certain that applying pressure there is kinder than using a bit?
Absolutely, yes. There just is no comparison between the two options there. The mouth is hugely sensitive. The tongue is a sense organ. The lips and the bars of the mouth are both extremely sensitive. The only relatively insensitive structure in the mouth are the teeth, which is why the bit why the horse can defend himself from the bit by grabbing it and taking charge. But no, the mouth is so sensitive. The bitless bridles are mostly painless, unless you have a leverage type of bridle. It would be difficult to cause pain with a non-leverage bitless bridle.
Right, and I think that again brings up another question, and this is from Sylvia in New Mexico, and I know Sylvia, and she's a very experienced rider, and I know that she feels that when a bit is properly fitted and just sort of hanging, and therefore as an experienced rider who can just basically communicate with the horse via the bit as opposed to controlling the horse, so it's a method of communication rather than a means of control. I know you wanted to respond to Sylvia particularly because she's obviously pro the bit, but then, as I say, she is a very experienced rider.
Yes, Sylvia, I'm happy to answer these questions. You submitted a group of very good questions, and your question is, why do I say that the bit causes pain in a horse's mouth? And you assume that it is properly fitted, properly hung, and used by educated hands. The problem is, even in educated hands, and even if it is properly fitted, if there is such a thing as fitting properly a foreign body in a horse's mouth, which physiologically it isn't, there are problems. And I say it causes pain for these reasons. I did a survey of skulls in natural history museums on the East Coast and collected 66 specimens, studied their lesions. And let me just check my figures here.
Whilst Bob's looking that up, I'm just replying to a few emails. People are sort of sending in questions now. If you are watching and have a question, then you can put it in the the Q&A box just below the video, and we will be collecting those and probably answering those in some shape or form. Let me just go back and show you what I'm talking about. We will be discussing those in some shape or form in a future communique. That might be in video format or in an email or in PDF format. So if you do have any questions from what Bob is asking, and I appreciate that we're not going to get through all the questions that have already been submitted. So if you do have a question, then use the Q&A box, answer it, and we will, as I say, try and cover it at some point in the future. So Bob, when you're ready, we'll come back to you.
Yes, okay, well, I found my little crib sheet here to remind me of what I discovered now in my survey, which was published back in 2010. 62% of the skulls, that's 62% of 66 skulls, more than half, showed bone spurs on the bars of the mouth. And these are caused by the bit. So this is post-mortem evidence, Sylvia, of the fact that, yes, the bit causes pain. Whether the rider recognizes this or not is not the question. The evidence comes from the horse. 62%. The other evidence from this same survey was of tremendous interest to me also, because 61% showed erosion of the first cheek tooth in the lower jaw as the result of that particular horse having grabbed the bit. The tooth was worn down and severely eroded. So that tells me that, well, several things. The horse was avoiding the pain of the bit on the bars of its mouth and transferring the bit, grabbing the bit and placing it between its teeth, and as a result wearing its teeth down, in some cases to such an extent that the tooth was shed, lost completely, and with all sorts of other periodontal infections alongside. So 2 bits of evidence, strong evidence of the pain that the bit causes. I also agree with you that yes, the bit sits, as you say, rests on the tongue, but the tongue is a very sensitive organ, and we know that the tongue can also be damaged. We know about cyanotic tongues. We know that tongues get lacerated and occasionally almost amputated. So yes, those 3 things: bone spurs, erosion of the teeth, and damage to the tongue, all hard evidence of the pain that a bit causes.
Very good. And just had an interesting comment come through, and this says the expression in Spanish for a runaway equine is desbocado, or unbitted, desbocado, which in reality means that the bit is useless in the mouth. So yeah. I don't know whether you're aware of that, Bob.
That's a lovely, I'd like to capture that expression, bocado.
Desbocado. I'll send it to you after the call.
Oh, yes, indeed. Well, that beautifully illustrates what I've just been saying. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. As I say, I'll pass that on to you in another time. All right.
I have to just add there, if I may, if I can remember it well enough myself, there's a wonderful stanza, a couple of lines from Shakespeare's Venus and Adonis, which encapsulates the whole situation and the nightmare occurrence of a horse taking charge. And the line is, the iron bit he crushes between his teeth, controlling what he was controlled by.
Right, let me think about that.
The horse is taking control of the very piece of equipment that was placed there in order to control him. But Shakespeare manages to say it in one very short, beautiful line.
Well, there you go. That's why he's Shakespeare. Okay, let's get back to some of the questions. So this one that's been sent in by Karen, not sure where Karen's from. I suppose I should have me on camera, but not that it matters. You don't really look at me. So because I'm just reading the screen. How do I help my horse adapt? I've been riding with a, do you pronounce it Duali? Duali?
Duali, yes. Yes.
Shows my ignorance. Go ahead. So this is really talking about, okay, we are curious and interested about this, but slightly scared and want to try and make the transition. So what's the easiest way to retrain a horse? And this has been asked, for example, by Matilda from Bergerac in France, as one example.
Well, the answer is, it is very simple. It's not complicated. Let me describe what you do. You read the manual of whichever bitless bridle you are wishing to use. Read that carefully, obviously, that makes sense. But having assumed that you've done that, the actual transition may take the horse maybe 5 minutes, might take you 30 minutes. Certainly the rider will understand the transition on day 1, and increasingly so in days following. The actual process of transitioning goes like this. Stage 1, take off the bitted bridle. Stage 2, place the bitless bridle in position and adjust it correctly. From the ground now, just check that the horse will respond to simple aids to go forward, turn left, turn right, and reverse. At that stage, you're ready to mount and walk away in a closed arena or a small paddock at the walk. And you walk for a few yards, perhaps twice around the arena, after which you might wish to trot a couple of times around the arena. And depending on your experience up to that point, you probably are ready to canter. If you want to see horses being transitioned, you can see that on film. If you go to my website, there's a video which I can guide you to a link showing how I transitioned 4 school horses at a Certified Horsemanship Association conference back in 2008. I transitioned them in front of the delegates from bit to bitless. These were school horses that had never before been ridden with a bitless bridle, and neither had the riders ever ridden with a bitless bridle. And so the video shows each horse carrying out a simple dressage test twice. Once with the bitted bridle, then in front of the camera, the bridle is removed and the bitless bridle installed, and the rider sets off immediately and does the test again. And the results from that, I mean, you can tell from that this whole experiment had to be condensed into an hour, I think it was at most, into the conference program. It didn't take long. The results I would like to give you of these, the test was judged by an experienced judge. The average score the rider achieved with the dressage test when bitted was 37 or 3.7, whichever number you like. When bitless, in the first 4 minutes of being bitless, the score was 64, 6.4. An improvement of 75% in the first 4 minutes of being bitless.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that there are really sort of strong opinions on both sides, and I do appreciate, and I'm trying to.
Opinions are as good as the evidence on which they're based, may I say.
Yeah, well, let me just come back to you on that, because there's a comment being made by Cheryl, and yeah, so sorry, just got it here. She says, you quoted 62% of the horses have spurs because they don't have independent seats and so on and so forth. But the other percentage, so therefore the 38%, we don't really know about their history. She said, had those riders and the other percentage had educated and better riders again, so better riders, then maybe it would have been a different result. She says, I find the science behind the webinar a bit lacking, since a skull with no riding history attached to it is missing a piece of interesting, important information. But if I may answer that, and again, I'm coming at it from my hopefully neutral standpoint, is that if 62% do have spurs and the other 38% don't, well, it might be that the other 38% did have some good riders, had some, were the horses of good riders, and therefore they maybe hadn't created the spurs in the mouth. But the truth is 62% did.
Yes.
And what percentage of good riders as opposed to not good riders are there? I'm not the person to judge that. But clearly, when 62% already have, that seems kind of overwhelming in itself, is it not? I don't know.
I absolutely agree. Thank you, Mark. I couldn't have expressed it better myself. And yes, I also agree with the questioner that had it been possible, and it isn't unfortunately with museum specimens, these specimens weren't accompanied by any sort of clinical history. So wouldn't that have been fascinating to have had that as well? But you know, you work with what you can get, and this, shall we say, is a first pass at collecting this sort of evidence. And I think it is a little possibly uncharitable to denigrate the evidence that I've collected after a lot of time and trouble at the museums on the grounds that the experiment or the design of the survey could have been better. Yes, I agree, it could have been better, and I hope that somebody else with time and opportunity will repeat and or improve on the protocol, shall we say, of that particular experiment. This is a starter.
Right, and I'm trying to sort of keep up with the questions that are coming in, and I know that we're not going to get through them all. So I'm going to start you off. Oh, come back, bring the camera back to me. So I'm going to start you off on a question and get you answering that, and then I'm going to sort of try and catch up. And for those who are actually watching live right now, and I might be watching on YouTube, if you actually go back to the original webinar link, you will get that. And if you're watching the replay, well, it makes a difference either way because you're still watching us, so that's good. Okay, so the next question, it says regarding sort of your the Dr. Cook Bitless bridle, but I guess Bitless bridles in general. I had someone say that they do not give release to the horse. I can only imagine that they mean the bridle on the whole head. Would you like to address that?
This is a question that does crop up quite frequently. The question of whether bitless bridles provide sufficient release. Obviously, anything I say about the cross under bridle will be taken quite rightly with a pinch of salt by everybody. And so I'm going to try and avoid commenting too much on my own bridle. But what I would suggest you do on this particular question, go to the internet, do a search for Dr. Jessica Jahil's website, a very good website called Horse Sense, and search her archives for what she says about release in relation to my bitless bridle. I maintain that it does release and provides sufficient release quickly enough in most cases. It might not provide rapid release if the traction that had been applied in the first instance was intense. But yes, it does provide release. If you stand by your horse having fitted the bridle and then place a finger under the straps of the bridle as any chosen point whilst applying tension to the rein, you will see that as you apply and release tension, you will sense very easily the release that the horse will also sense. So yes, even though the noseband may not shift in a downward direction and or the rein may not show an obvious difference in length as a result of the release, the actual pressure has been released, the tension has gone. If you're still convinced and still worried about the possibility that you could get better release, you could change the beta cross-under strap, for example, for a nylon webbing strap, or you could replace it with a nylon yachting cord strap, both of which might give you better release. But that having been said about the question of release and let's talk a moment about the comparison between release with a bitless bridle and release with a bitted bridle. When we're talking about pressure and release with a bit, we're really talking in most cases not just about pressure, we're talking about pressure and pain. And certainly it's very important to release a horse from that. When we're talking about bitless bridles, we're not talking about that degree of pressure, because the pressure is far better distributed around the horse's head. It's not focal pressure, as is, for example, the high heel of a lady's shoe on a wooden floor. The bitless bridles distribute the pressure around the horse's head to a greater or lesser extent. And so there isn't the same urgency for release in the first instance. And certainly you're not needing to release a horse from the pain. It's been a touch, not a painful and aversive stimulus.
Okay, now we've had a response from a couple of people, and as I say, this is only going to apply to the people who are live on the call, and one of them is Cheryl, so thank you, Cheryl. I know we mentioned your comments earlier, and then Sivia has also responded. And they both kind of make the same point, and that point is that it's the difference between good riders and not good riders. So therefore, for example, Sivia is saying, not... What I have seen, between 95 and 99% of people do not ride properly or use the bit properly. Now, all of the mouth issues that Dr. Cook speaks of are not caused by the bit. The bit is no life of its own. In order to cause, so it's that whole question about guns don't kill people, people kill people. So it's that whole argument, which I totally get. And so I think that there's the difference, and we need to draw that line possibly between good riders and not so good riders. And it's a bit, and then I guess we get into the territory of like people who drive, car drivers. We all think we're a really good car driver, but we know when push comes to shove, actually, we're probably not, or we're just still convinced we are. Do you see what I'm saying, Bob? And that's an issue. Are bitless bridles better for the not so good riders?
Yes, they're also better for the elite riders, but the question should be approached from the horse's point of view. If we human beings elect to ride horses, but the horses are volunteers, or they're dragooned, if you like, they're conscripted, but we should think of it from the horse's point of view. And the reality of the world is that, yes, there are good and bad riders, like there are good and bad drivers. The definition of a good rider is one with a relentlessly independent seat, the hands of a neurosurgeon, and the brain of a Buddha. There aren't many such paragons about, unfortunately. And it's impossible to put a percentage figure on it, but I think if we said there were 5% of riders who are that good, that's about it. So 95% are less than master horsemen. And the reality is, and I include myself in this group, I never was anything but a very moderate horseman. We unintentionally, in most cases, and certainly inadvertently, we do cause trouble to our horses. And we should, from an ethical point of view, be choosing a method of communication that is humane and physiologically acceptable to the horse. And a bit is not humane, and neither is it physiologically acceptable. Even those 5% of elite riders, if we're including, for example, elite riders in the racing world, and even in the dressage world, there are problems over and above the pain that a bit causes. Physiologically, a running horse should be running with its lips sealed and a dry mouth. The sealing of the lips, the closed lip, allows the horse and follows a swallow on the part of the horse in the first instance, which now creates what essentially is a vacuum in the oral cavity in the mouth and throat, the digestive part of the throat. This vacuum is, I now realize, essential to allow a horse to breathe properly. And if we're talking about racehorses, it becomes of prime importance. If you now put a bit in a racehorse's mouth, you are breaking that seal. Because you break the seal, you eliminate the vacuum that previously would have glued or clamped the soft palate to the root of the tongue during galloping. So now you've got a racehorse with no vacuum in its mouth, but positive pressure and some air. The soft palate is no longer tethered to the root of the tongue and can and does blow about in the breeze. The result of that is that it obstructs the airway in the throat. The horse is subjected to a degree of suffocation. This has a cascade effect on the lungs because the lungs become bruised as a result of excessive negative pressure on the lung at each inspiration, which occurs 2.5 times a second in a galloping horse. The lungs become bruised for the same reason that a hickey bruises a girl's skin. But the lungs are much more sensitive, and the bruise is far more dangerous and also more repetitive. The result is that the lungs become waterlogged. The horse begins to bleed from the lungs. This is, I believe, the source and the cause of bleeding. And in any given race, the degree of waterlogging can become so severe that the horse will die from heart failure caused by that waterlogging. So you can start the race with what appears to be a healthy horse, and before the wire, the horse is dead, or as happened at Pimlico yesterday, the winning horse gets to the unsaddling enclosure, to the winning enclosure, and drops dead before it gets back to the barn. This is waterlogging of the lung, pulmonary edema. So what I'm saying to Sivira and others is that this question about educated riders not hurting their horse is not the end of the question. There are other physiological parameters to be considered. And so even the elite horsemen, the 5%ers, they're still endangering their horse, especially if it happens to be a racehorse, and even a dressage horse or a show jumper or an eventer, even an endurance horse.
Okay, very good. Right, I have a question here, which is from Robin in New York, and this is kind of the first of several questions we're going to have that are responding to other people. So this one says, I have several friends who compete in gymkhana events, barrel racing, pole bending, etc. Their horses are fast, in block capitals. They have to start fast, run fast, turn fast, stop fast, extremely fast. 1/100th of a second could mean the difference between second and first place and a large cash award. They all insist that their horses require leverage bits or leverage hackamores so they can not only turn and stop fast, but also rate their horses around the barrels. I'm not sure, but I think that means control the speed during the tight turns. I offered my Bitless bridle to one of the women so she could see how her horse goes, but she said her horse was much too fast to go without a bit. So this is an interesting and specific question, but I guess it kind of echoes that whole question about control.
Yes, and I have to find myself repeating something.
That's fine. There'll be a lot of that, I suspect.
A horse only needs to be touched. It doesn't respond any better to pain and heavy pressure. In fact, it responds rather less well. And I can tell you that many people compete successfully and happily with bitless bridles in barrel racing. It is done, can be done. And so it's there. and whether you as a rider or your friends who are doing this riding feel justified in using more severe forms of communication. They may feel it's justified, but I can't say that I agree. You can do what you need to do without hurting a horse, and if it was really true that you can't barrel race without hurting a horse, then I would have to also add that you shouldn't be barrel racing.
Yes, but that's a whole different moral topic,
No,
isn't it?
no, it's a connected ethic. Yes.
Oh, for sure. But it's what do we use horses for? And then should we be using horses anyway? So,
well, yes, but if I may continue a moment, we should nevertheless, if we are going to use horses, it's incumbent on us to be as kind as we possibly can, and certainly we can be a lot kinder using bitless bridles than we can using bits.
Okay, so I was going to pick up on another one of those questions about what one says to other people, and this is quite a general type question, and I guess those who want to do it and would like to make the transition, or trying to persuade others to make the transition perhaps. This is from Susie in New South Wales, Australia, who says, what is the best answer I can give people when they ask me the question, are bitless bridles safe? As most people want some sort of proof, in inverted commas.
Good question. Thank you. Yes. We have been, and excuse me for, shall we say, blowing my own tin trumpet here, but we've been selling, my company has been selling bitless bridles for 17 years now at a conservative estimate, and a very conservative estimate. We have sold something over 50,000 bridles. During that time, in these 17 years, having sold that number of bridles, I have not received one report or complaint or even suggestion that an accident was caused by my bridle. I very much doubt whether if the same number of bitted bridles were, shall we say, monitored over the same period of time, that such a happy conclusion could be reported. So yes, bitless riding still has risks, but they are vastly reduced. And I will add a tailpiece to that and say that though we haven't received any complaints or reports, and certainly, touch wood, no litigation, blaming a bridle for an accident, what we have received are a number of descriptions and thankful comments from people who have said that an incident occurred which, had the horse been wearing a bitted bridle, would have led to a serious accident. So I can also claim that we know that accidents have been averted.
Right, very good. Okay, again, trying to keep the flow of the conversation going. A couple of points have come in. One was from Bev, who said, I've been riding in a light rider bitless bridle for years with different horses, and there's been no transition period. No in block capitals. I just put it on and started riding. The horses loved it, and I've never had a problem, I think is what she goes on to say there.
Yes.
And Sivia has written again. Basically, if I can find that, bear with me a second. Let me just see if I can. Okay, she's written it somewhere else. I remember now. Sorry, bear with me, folks. I'm just trying to find her note. Here we go. Yeah, so Sivia's written. In proper riding, pressure is not used on the bit. I do not believe in putting pressure on the mouth or anywhere else on the horse, including the head. I believe that instead of putting so much emphasis on exchanging the bit for a bitless solution, bitless should be a last resort, not a first. Emphasis should be placed on teaching people proper riding. And I understand that point of view and what you're trying to say, Sylvia, but surely people don't want to do that. They just want to get in their car and drive. They just want to get on their horse and ride. And yes, some people will take riding lessons, but once they've got the basics down, that's it. And like I said, there are some pretty poor car drivers out there, as we know, and there's going to be some pretty poor riders out there. So then you've got to come at it from the situation. If they're not going to improve their riding, and obviously statistics show, and you said yourself, that 95% of people are not good riders, and therefore have not, that spectrum has not changed, and therefore what is the kinder approach? I'm asking the question. So back to the questions. Sorry, Bob, I haven't forgotten you. Yes, so what was the next question?
There was something I wanted to say to Beth about her experience over transitioning her horses, and I was happy to hear her results and the ease with which she transitioned them. But of others, the horses get it within the first 5 minutes. The riders may take 30 minutes. An occasional rider may take as much as, but so many times we get wonderful testimonials written by folks who write them on the evening of day one. Some idea of how quickly the change begin to show improvement. The horse gets it straight away, as I say, 5 minutes. And I have to say that if we're talking about ethics and humanity, and the two options of improving both of those features, it's so much quicker to take a bit out of a horse's mouth than it is to educate a rider. It might take half a lifetime to educate the rider, and it takes overnight to allow that same rider to now ride humanely and kindly and more safely.
Yeah. I think it's just there's just a lot of fear about removing a bit and replacing it with the bitless bridle because of this danger of this whole recurring theme about lack of control. And in fact, some of the comments I've been reading here saying that trainers say you must have, this is coming from trainers themselves. And obviously, there's probably a whole spectrum of different trainers, aren't there? There might be people like Sylvia and Cheryl and others who have been instructors and riding instructors for many, many, many years and appreciate the difference. And then maybe, I guess anyone could call themselves a trainer. So there's a good and bad in those too, I suspect.
With all due respect to trainers in general, some trainers give incorrect and currently outdated advice with regard to recommending and even insisting that their pupils use a bit. And there was one heart-breaking question from some person with which I had great sympathy. She was receiving the wrong advice from her trainer, and she already owns a bitless bridle and has a horse on which she would like to use it. And I say to her, go ahead, please. You will be thanked by your horse on day one.
Right, so, wrong screen. So let me just get back to the questions. And so here's a series of perhaps more technical questions, which I'd like you to cover if you can. So this one's from Amanda in Wisconsin. How does a bitless bridle affect the nuntial ligament of the horse?
That's a curious question. I wonder what the question I had in mind. The bitless bridle would be an advantage to the nuchal ligament. It wouldn't certainly do it any harm. I can think of circumstances with a bitted bridle if the horse was hyperflexed, where the nuchal ligament would come under a good deal of stress and strain. Again, in the opposite direction, as the result of a bit and the horse carrying his head too high, again, the nuchal ligament would be under unnecessary strain. We should aim with our riding to mimic or get as close as possible to the circumstances of a horse at liberty. And we should allow the horse to put its head where the horse wants to put its head. The horse knows better than we do as with regard to balance and self-carriage and collection. And we should do two things as riders. We should get out of their mouths and we should give them back their head. And constant contact with a bit, the sort of contact that is recommended by the FEI and insisted on, with this worn-out phrase requiring the horse to be on the bit, leads people to think that they need to, as it were, put their horses into a frame, and a good deal of misunderstanding as to what self-carriage and balance really is. You don't achieve self-carriage and balance by artificially and mechanically altering the position of your horse's head and insisting on what you feel is the right position. You should leave that to the horse. Your job as a rider and as a trainer is to ensure that your horse is fit enough to carry your weight, and the horse will now, over time, become balanced, collected, and a happy horse.
And so say all of us. Right. Thank you for your comments of coming in. I'm balancing about 3 different screens here, trying to keep up with the flow of conversation on the live call, and then the questions that we've had in that have been posted before the call. So again, if you have a question that it's not been answered and you would like covered, we can perhaps do it another time in some other format, or maybe again on another webinar. So just answer it in the Q&A box beneath the webinar you're watching right now, whichever version you're watching. Right. So yeah, Sylvia again is making the point about riding instructors need to get proper instruction too, and this is not something that can change overnight, but it will never change if we don't focus on it. And again, I don't think we are disagreeing on that. You know, if we can raise the standards of instruction then and instructors, then that's obviously a good thing for the horse. But yeah, so we're not disagreeing. Right, so now let me go back to the next question. How does the bit affect the TMJ? This is from Brooke in Georgia.
I'm not aware that the bit affects the TMJ, but that may be because the TMJ has not been sufficiently examined to really know whether the TMJ is damaged or not by a bit. It may be. The answer is we don't know. The TMJ over recent years has certainly been examined more carefully by a number of anatomists and radiologists, and some interesting studies are now being done, and we shall certainly learn a little more about the TMJ in years to come, I'm sure. But at the present moment, there isn't, I don't think, or believe, sufficient evidence for us to talk in a way knowledgeably about TMJs, normal or abnormal.
Okay, let's cover that one off. The next one is from Anne in York in the UK, and she says, I have a very strong and hot gypsy cob which I ride bitless. She seems to tuck her head right in. Is she saying she doesn't like the pressure on her nose? I try and hold release, but sometimes she doesn't listen. Do you want me to repeat that?
Yes, would you? I think I've lost the thread of that one. This is a hot horse that doesn't appear to like the bit, but doesn't like...
No, she rides bitless, but she seems to tuck her head right in, as if she's saying she doesn't like the pressure on her nose.
Well, I would have to ask her, and how much rein pressure are you using? And or what did the horse do prior to this particular moment? How long have you owned the horse? How long was it bitted, perhaps, before you became the owner? Is this a remnant from the days when hyperflexion was used on this same horse? But if you're continuing to use pressure, which I imagine you're not, there's some other reason why the horse is tucking his head in. He's obviously not well balanced. I would certainly encourage you to just keep going with Bitless training and keep out of his mouth and give him his head to a very great extent. I think you will find that the horse will correct himself in the passage of time. A form of riding which I've become increasingly interested in over the last few years, thanks to work that a colleague of mine has been doing in New Zealand, Dr. Fridtjof Hansen, and I introduced him to the Bidu bridle. I was given such a bridle in Kuwait many years ago, and to cut a long story short, because he was training a horse bitless for an experiment in Massey University. He was wanting to keep this horse completely bitless for a period of time. I sent him the Bidu bridle, and he saw the bridle. It's a very apparently a flimsy affair. It's essentially a woolen headstall with a flannel noseband and a light chain over the noseband, coupled with a weighted rein, a long and very interesting weighted rein. And he saw this bridle and recognized immediately that it was in line with the cross-under bridle that he'd been using. So he popped it straight on a horse of his own and went for a 40K endurance ride, which the horse won without any difficulty. In fact, came home rather quicker than it should have done according to the recommendations, but it was in fine condition and passed the vet check and so on. So just to expand on this a little bit, the upshot of this experience that Dr. Hansen has now accumulated over more than a year with many different horses using the bitless, using the Bidu bridle, the Bedouin bridle, is he has learned the advantage and merit of using a weighted rein with a bitless bridle and learning to ride with a completely loose rein. Loose in the sense that there was no constant pressure on the horse other than the weight of the rein, and communicating not with any additional pressure, but merely with a shake of the rein or a mere vibration of the rein. This is the way that the Bedouin horsemen controlled their horses during tribal raids, and they were riding at risk of their life. They depended on their horse for survival. So they worked out this method of riding, which we seem to have forgotten. And it's certainly something we would like to reintroduce. It sounds obviously to everybody today more like Western riding, but Western riding is really a descendant of Bedouin riding. And I think we should overcome our traditional longing to ride English, shall we say. My traditional longing has always been, and recognize that there are better ways to ride. And this loose rein riding is something that I think is of extreme value and tremendous interest.
That sounds like an interesting new development, and I remember we spoke about that before. So
Yeah.
yes, I will look forward to hearing more about that. Right, we've done over the hour as I glance up at my clock above me, and so I would just like to cover up a couple of other questions. And thank you for all your comments that have come in and questions. And as I say, we will do a roundup if we don't cover them. But this question here is probably one that is on a lot of people's lips. So let me ask it, and afterwards I should try and tell you who it was. Yes, I can probably do that. Hold me a second. And I'm now struggling. So anyway, I'll come back to who it was in a second, but let me just read it. I desperately want to use my Dr. Cook bridle on my TWH. However, because I'm only an advanced beginner, my 8-year-old mare is a bit of a brat. The trainers think I should have a bit. That's that one I read out earlier. She is a bit spooky. Because trainers feel I should have a bit more control, I will now not ride her at all. I refuse to put a bit in her mouth. She has bolted on me before with a bit in her mouth. From fear, all I did was pull on the reins. As a result, she simply grabbed the bit between her teeth, not metaphorically, literally. So having a bit in her mouth was no advantage. Please help me understand that I can be more confident in a similar situation if I go bitless. She is super sweet on the ground.
Yeah, this is the question from the respondent that I mentioned earlier. With that, I'm sorry I don't remember your name, but
I'll try and find it for you. Yes,
thank you for such a good question, and your description encapsulates the very problem that we've talked about already. The fact that you're getting strong-armed by your trainer into continuing to use a bit that you don't wish to use. And I admire your ethical stand here, and even though it required you to stop riding your horse altogether, much as you would have liked to have done, but you'd rather not ride at all rather than put a bit in your horse's mouth. The good news is, as I mentioned before, go ahead. You were receiving incorrect and outdated advice. Your horse will thank you on day one, and you will have the delight and satisfaction of doing something rather wonderful for your horse and yourself.
It seems to me, Bob, that by the way, I found the name. It was Joni from New Jersey. So thank you, Joni. It seems to me, Bob, that it's on the one hand there's a lack of education or misinformation, shall we say, from some trainers, but there is this big fear that people need to get over because they love their horse, but they fear this lack of control. And it's almost like, if they were just, what's the worst thing that could happen? And the problem is the answer to that question could be pretty nasty. So my question to you is, how does one get past that? Because it's easy to say, here's an interesting new dish I've just cooked. Try it. Well, obviously there's not a great deal of risk in that. But if I say to you, well, take the bit off your horse, just try it, that's a whole different ball game. So what do you say in that sort of situation?
Well, I think anyone considering transitioning and is scared of the idea should keep reminding themselves of the fact that the bit method of control has this inbuilt flaw. It doesn't control. The horse can take control. We've been through this. We've talked about it. The horse can grab your bit and render you, the rider, helpless. And it's a bit like driving a car and suddenly, alarmingly, finding that your car is picking up speed. You go to the brakes and find that they are not working. You go to the steering and you find that that doesn't work either. This is a nightmare. And this is the sort of thing that happens to a bitted rider, because the bit has been taken out of the rider's hands, essentially. It's in the horse's mouth. It's between its teeth. And the metaphor, getting the bit between your teeth, has allowed us to forget this, it seems. It's not a good thing. It's a very dangerous circumstance. So remind yourself when you're wondering whether you have the courage to go bitless, remind yourself of the extreme danger that you are running if you continue to ride with a bit, because contrary to what you have been told by people who appear to you to have more experience, the bit does not control a horse. The horse can be controlled or communicated with. I much prefer to use the word communication. Much better by not hurting the horse. The horse is basically a peaceful animal. It's not a ferocious beast. If it's handled gently, it's a calm animal. It tends to lead a rather quiet life, and prefers that. It's looking for comfort and safety and plenty of grass and lots of movement. It is easily frightened. If it hadn't been evolved to be easily frightened, it wouldn't still be with us. It would have been eaten by lions and wolves a long time ago. So we have to bear in mind that here is a peaceful animal, but it's a nervous animal. It's a very frightened or potentially very easily scared animal. And we hurt a horse at our own risk. And we should consider that very carefully. Better to not hurt the horse. The horse is much less likely to hurt you.
Thank you, Bob. A quick comment from you on the question of developing relationship and groundwork in advance of maybe going bitless.
The answer is yes, absolutely, especially with an unschooled horse. Do groundwork and more groundwork, yes. If the horse has been bitted for 12 years and you want to transition him to bitless, then presumably he knows something about the basics, and a little groundwork is still advisable, but you don't have to spend half a lifetime retraining him, shall we say. Check out that he understands what is being asked of him from the ground, but that can be done in maybe 5-10 minutes, and then quietly away. Okie
doke. Right, quick comment from Camille in Pennsylvania, who says, a comment about trainers. I tell everyone I know who have trainers that refuse to use a bitless bridle, I tell them simply, find another trainer. So I think that sums it up. Right, we're out of time pretty much, and I think we got through most of the questions. And what I'd like to do is we will send you a PDF summary of some of the main questions that we covered today and some other frequently asked questions. I think that's probably the easiest way to cover off some of those, as I say, the frequently asked questions that, and the real questions that people have behind should they or should they not, and what are the dangers and what are the pros and what are the cons, and are there any dangers in fact. So we'll get that organized and sent to you in due course. I would like to thank Bob for joining us today. Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome. I'm happy to have been involved.
Yeah, that's great. And I'd also like to say that I have been in discussion with Bob, and I'm delighted to announce that Horse Conscious is I'm set it up. But Horse Conscious is officially a supplier now of Dr. Cook's Bitless bridles. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn the camera back to Bob whilst I look up the link for this. So bear with me a second and I shall look this up. So Bob, if you'd like to give us your closing thoughts and give me about a minute and a half to do what I've got to do. You're covering for me. That's what it's called in the trade.
Well, I'm running short of questions now. What can I say in this precious 1.5 minutes, except that I do understand people's fears. Please know that I am fully aware of that. Had someone suggested to me when I was riding that I should throw away the bit, I would have looked at them with astonishment and a certain amount of dismay and even ridicule. But please know that there have been, that I now know better myself. It's taken me nearly 20 years to discover this, but I know that I am doing more to help horses and to help owners now than I have ever been able to do in the previous 50 years of my career. It's a great satisfaction to me personally that I am able to do this work and to promote the change that I see now happening. There's a tremendous enthusiasm and grassroots support for this kind of way of riding, and I would like to see this being recognized by the associations and see them giving serious thought to changing their competition rules. The pleasure horsemen and and others who are not competing are leading the way and showing by example. And it's the professional horsemen, so-called, and the elite horsemen need to just study what is happening, because they can improve their own horse's performance if allowed to by the associations in which they compete. It's a win-win situation. You've got by removing the bit, you have a happier horse, you have a healthier horse, you have fewer veterinary fees, you don't have to replace your horse so frequently, you get better performance. You as a rider find that being bitless, you can train your horse so much more easily and more rapidly and with fewer problems and complications. So the horse learns more rapidly and learns better. If they're in pain, they can't listen and learn. They're a bit like school children. If a child is hurting, there's no point in sending that child to school. And the same applies to the horse. The horse, if free of pain, is a wonderfully compliant animal and willing to partner with you if you give him a chance. And the best way of giving him a chance, or one of the best ways certainly, is to take the bit out of his mouth. And if you can do that at the same time as taking him out of the stable, that would be wonderful too. Have I taken up my minute and a half?
You have. You've done a great job. Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much indeed. And there should be a link now appearing underneath the screen at some point. So when that does appear, then you can click that and view the range of different Bitless, Dr. Cook Bitless bridles on our sister site, Chelsea Horse, and then .com. It'll shortly be on horseconscious.com too, probably. So thank you for your time today. Thank you to Bob for joining us. I hope it's been useful. I hope you found it valuable information. We'd love to hear your feedback, and we look forward to speaking with you next time. So that's all
Thank
from
you
us.
for all the good questions.
Yes, thank you indeed, everyone. And it's goodbye from Bob and I, and we'll speak to you next time. Bye for now. Bye-bye.